My name is Evelyn Vance, but for most of my 32 years on this earth, I've been a ghost at my own family's table. I'm the kind of person who can walk into a room, and the conversation doesn't just continue. It doesn't even register my presence. It's a strange superpower, the invisibility of the perpetually responsible. You learn to observe. You become a student of the subtle currents of affection that flow around you but never seem to touch you. You see, the way my mother Helen's entire posture softens when my younger sister, Isabella, enters a room, as if a physical weight has been lifted. You feel the shift in the atmospheric pressure, the way my father Richard's booming voice finds a gentler, more adoring tone. For my entire life, Isabella has been the sun, a dazzling, chaotic, beautiful star around which our entire family system orbited. And well, I was just a shadow she cast. A cool, quiet place where nothing exciting ever happened. Last Saturday, however, a secret I had guarded with the ferocity of a dragon for 3 long years, a secret worth precisely $16,247,000 was dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. And the shadow didn't just find a voice. It learned how to roar. The fire that erupted didn't just scorch the edges of our carefully curated family portrait. It burned the whole canvas, the frame, and the wall it was hanging on, right down to the studs. It all happened at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party. It was a lavish, almost painfully perfect affair, held in the sprawling, emerald green backyard of their Connecticut home, a place I've always associated with the scent of freshly cut grass and unspoken disappointments. It was the kind of party you see in magazines, where the champagne is older than half the guests, and everyone is dressed in muted, expensive fabrics that whisper old money even when it's brand new. Isabella, of course, was the architect of this perfection. The party was the flagship event for her latest career incarnation. Bella Vita Events, a boutique party, planning business funded, as all her ventures were, by a bottomless, no-interest, no-timeline loan from Mom and Dad. I stood near a ridiculously large potted fern, which I felt a certain kinship with, nursing a glass of sparkling water and watching the performance. She was breathtaking, a vision in a flowing silk dress, the color of a perfect summer sunset. Her laughter, loud and musical, was the event's soundtrack. My father, a man who built his logistics empire on brutal efficiency, followed her like a starstruck boy, his chest puffed out, telling anyone who would listen how his Bella had a true gift for creating magic from thin air. My mother was her ever-present lady-in-waiting, hovering nearby to smooth a stray strand of Isabella's golden hair or to freshen her drink, her face a perfect mask of beatific maternal pride. And then there was me, just Evie. I wore a simple, timeless navy dress that I'd owned for 5 years. My shoes were sensible. My car, a reliable sedan parked discreetly down the street, was paid off. I was the dependable daughter who drove herself, arrived precisely on time, and would, without a doubt, be the one helping the catering staff stack chairs after everyone else had gone home. It was a role I had played for so long, I almost forgot it was a costume. No one there knew that the sensible dress was a deliberate act of camouflage. No one knew that the unassuming car was a carefully chosen prop. And no one, not a single soul in that perfectly manicured garden, knew that I could have written a check to buy this house, this party, and my father's logistics company, and my bank account would have barely registered the dip. They all saw exactly what they had been trained to see for 3 decades. Dependable, unremarkable, stable Evie. The low-maintenance daughter whose quiet competence had conveniently created the perfect, hassle-free backdrop for Isabella's vibrant, chaotic life to unfold. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, the tectonic plates of our family were grinding against each other, building a pressure that had to be released. Isabella, in her endless, desperate pursuit of a lifestyle she felt she was entitled to, had recently backed herself into a financial corner so tight, not even our parents could easily extract her. Her frustration over my refusal to be her latest bailout was simmering just beneath that perfect, sunny smile. She thought I was being stingy. She thought I was jealously guarding the modest salary of a mid-level software engineer. She had no idea that I wasn't just guarding a small treasure chest. I was a dragon sitting on a mountain of gold so vast it blotted out the Sunday. And what happens when a desperate person, a person who believes the world owes them everything, discovers a dragon's hoard? They don't just ask for a few coins. They try to slay the dragon and take the whole mountain. What she was about to learn, what they were all about to learn, was that my years of silence hadn't been a sign of weakness. They were the years I spent forging my armor, sharpening my claws, and learning how to breathe fire. If you have ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, if you know what it's like to be the quiet one, the responsible one, the one whose accomplishments are acknowledged with a distracted nod while your siblings' every whim is celebrated with a parade, then you know the kind of silent, unbreakable strength that kind of upbringing forges deep in your bones. You are about to hear how a lifetime of being underestimated became my greatest weapon. Before we get into the heart of how that perfect party became a battlefield, if my story is already speaking to a part of you that you've kept hidden, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know, and trust me when I say you are not going to want to miss a single, solitary second of what is coming next. To truly understand the seismic detonation that occurred at that party, you have to understand the 30 years of pressure that built up beneath it. Our family wasn't overtly abusive. It was something far more subtle and, in some ways, more insidious. It was a kingdom with a carefully defined and ruthlessly enforced hierarchy. My father, Richard Vance, is a man who clawed his way up from a blue-collar background to build a multi-million-dollar logistics company. As a result, he worships at the altar of things that are tangible, impressive, and charismatic. He values showmanship over substance. Isabella was, from birth, all of those things. I was none of them. I think back to our childhood, and it plays like a highlight reel of her life, with me as a blurry figure in the background. I remember our 5th-grade talent show. Isabella decided, the night before, that she was going to sing. She didn't know the words to the song, and she was painfully off-key. But she got up on that stage in a sparkly dress and belted it out with a confidence that was almost hypnotic. She got a standing ovation. My parents were on their feet, tears in their eyes, overcome with pride at her bravery. I had spent 3 months building a fully functional miniature volcano that actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar. It won the science fair blue ribbon. When I showed it to my parents, my father glanced at it over the top of his newspaper and said, "That's neat, Evie. Don't get that stuff on the carpet." That dynamic, that fundamental difference in how our efforts were valued, became the blueprint for our entire lives. The most searing example, the one that I still feel like a phantom limb, was our 16th birthdays. They are a week apart. For Isabella's birthday, my parents threw a massive, catered party in the backyard. The centerpiece of the event was her gift, a brand new cherry red convertible, despite the fact that she had already failed her driving test twice. I remember my mother's justification, whispered to me as if it were a state secret. "She just needs a little confidence boost, honey. It'll motivate her." My birthday, a week later, was a quiet dinner at home with a store-bought cake. My gift was a city bus pass and a new savings bond. "Responsibility is the greatest gift we can give you, Evelyn," my father announced, as if bestowing a crown. The message was crystal clear, and it would be repeated in 1,000 different ways over the years. Isabella's feelings were a fragile, precious commodity that required constant investment and protection. My feelings were irrelevant because I was the strong one. I was the one who could handle disappointment. It was my job. College was the same story, just on a grander scale. Isabella scraped by in high school with C's and a magnetic social life, and my parents threw a lavish party to celebrate her acceptance into the general arts program at the state university. They co-signed for loans, paid for her dorm room to be custom decorated, and set her up with a generous monthly allowance. I, on the other hand, had worked myself to the bone. I graduated as valedictorian and earned a full academic scholarship to Carnegie Mellon's prestigious computer science program. When I told them, sitting at the same dining room table where Isabella's acceptance had been feted with champagne, my father nodded slowly, a thoughtful look on his face. "Well," he said, "that's practical. It's good you won't have any debt. You've always been our sensible one. There was no party, there was no champagne. There was just an acknowledgement of a sound financial decision. My achievement wasn't a source of pride. It was a source of relief. It meant I wouldn't be a financial burden." This fundamental misunderstanding of who we were as people continued into adulthood. Every time Isabella stumbled, and she stumbled often, it was treated as a Shakespearean tragedy. She cycled through majors, then jobs, then boyfriends, leaving a trail of debt and drama in her wake. Each failure was met with a family council, emergency funds, and endless affirmations of her creative spirit and brave heart. I, meanwhile, methodically built my life. I graduated with honors, moved to Austin for a tech job where I knew no one, and slowly, quietly began my ascent. I never asked them for anything, because I knew, with the certainty of a religious zealot, what the answer would be. They would say yes, but it would come with a lecture. It would come with a sigh. It would be tallied on a silent, invisible ledger of my failures, a stark contrast to the open, unconditional account they kept for my sister. They didn't see my independence as strength. They saw it as proof that I didn't need them. And in our family, to not be needed was to not be loved. The story of the $16 million began in the suffocating quiet of a cramped, third-floor walk-up apartment in Austin, Texas. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, and the only soundtrack to my life was the hum of my computer and the distant wail of sirens. While my family pictured me diligently plugging away at my 9-to-5 coding job, a stable but uninspired existence, the reality was that my real work began the moment I got home. I was living a double life. From 9 to 5, I was Evelyn Vance, a competent but unremarkable software engineer. But from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. every single night, and for every waking hour on the weekends, I was the sole architect of a secret project that had become my obsession. I had discovered a flaw, a massive, gaping inefficiency in the architecture of enterprise-level logistics software. It was a deeply technical, unglamorous problem related to predictive data modeling for supply chain management. It was the kind of puzzle that would make most people's eyes glaze over in seconds. To me, it was the most beautiful, intricate, and compelling problem I had ever encountered. For 2 solid years, I poured every ounce of my intellectual and emotional energy into solving it. I became a hermit. My 2 roommates, who I barely saw, must have thought I was in a cult. I survived on frozen pizza and a burning, obsessive need to build something that was flawlessly, entirely my own. Something no one could ever dismiss as neat. I was creating a new kind of algorithm, a self-learning piece of software I codenamed Nexus. It didn't just track data, it anticipated problems. It could predict shipping bottlenecks weeks in advance, identify patterns of warehouse theft, and optimize delivery routes with a level of efficiency that was, at the time, science fiction. It was my whole life, compressed into millions of lines of code, born in the obscurity of my tiny, cluttered, spare bedroom. When it was finally finished, I knew with a terrifying certainty that it was revolutionary. But the memory of my parents' polite, vacant stare when I won the science fair was a ghost that haunted me. I couldn't bear the thought of showing them this, my magnum opus, only to be met with a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, honey." So I made a decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I would give my creation a life entirely separate from my own. I would sever it from the name Evelyn Vance and all the baggage that came with it. I founded a shell company, a deliberately bland and anonymous entity called Applied Velocity Solutions, or AV Solutions. I created a pseudonym for myself, AV Solutions. Vance, a reclusive founder who only communicated via email. It was the perfect shield. I started small, offering a few mid-sized e-commerce companies a free 6-month trial of Nexus. The results were immediate and explosive. One company, which had been losing nearly 15% of its inventory to logistical errors and spoilage, saw that number plummet to less than 1% in the first quarter. Their CEO called my intermediary, a freelance business consultant I'd hired to be the public face of the company, and raved that Nexus was black magic. Word of mouth in the tech and logistics sectors is a powerful force. Within a year, AV Solutions was the mysterious new unicorn everyone was talking about. We were deluged with requests for demos. I had to hire my first real employee, a brilliant and fiercely loyal project manager named Marcus, who I let in on the secret. He understood my need for anonymity and became the public-facing CEO, handling the meetings and the handshaking while I remained the architect in the shadows. We grew at a breakneck pace. My tiny apartment gave way to a modest but comfortable house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But I was pathologically careful to avoid any outward signs of my new reality. I kept my old Honda. I shopped at the same grocery stores. When I visited my family for holidays, I wore my same old clothes and talked vaguely about my job being challenging but stable. They never pressed for details. Why would they? I was fitting perfectly into the box they had built for me. I was sensible Evie, with her sensible job. The story was simple, it was comfortable, and it required no challenging of their long-held beliefs. They didn't want me to be a star. The sky in their universe only had room for one. Then, after 3 years of this clandestine growth, the titans of the industry took notice. Omnicorp, a global tech behemoth whose software runs on virtually every computer in the world, came sniffing around. At first, they wanted an exclusive licensing deal. When Marcus, under my direction, refused, they came back with a different proposal, a full acquisition. Their first offer was $8 million. I remember seeing the number in an email from Marcus and feeling my vision go blurry. I almost threw up. The negotiations were a brutal, high-stakes poker game that lasted for 4 months. They were conducted entirely through encrypted video calls from my home office, often in the middle of the night. Omnicorp's M&A team was relentless, but I knew what I had built, and I refused to undervalue it. Finally, we arrived at a number. They would acquire AV Solutions for $16 million, and I would sign a lucrative 2-year consulting contract under my real name, to be explained as the original anonymous creator. The day the wire transfer hit my account, I sat in my office chair for a full hour, just staring at the number on my screen. It didn't feel real. It was a figure of pure fantasy. My first, overwhelming impulse was to call my parents and scream the news, to finally show them the blue ribbon, but I stopped my hand before it reached the phone. I played the scene out in my head, the shock, the disbelief, and then the slow, inevitable absorption of my success into their world. My victory would become their talking point at the country club. My money would become the solution to Isabella's next self-inflicted crisis. My achievement would be colonized. So I closed my laptop. I took a deep breath, and I said nothing. I invested the money, hired a team of brilliant advisors, and went on playing the part of Evelyn Vance, the unremarkable daughter. It wasn't a lie. It was a firewall. And I was determined to protect what I had built from the people I was supposed to trust the most. Of course, here is the continuation of the story, with each of the remaining 7 parts significantly expanded to meet your requirements for length, depth, and narrative power. The first tremor before the cataclysm arrived 6 months before the anniversary party, disguised as a frantic, breathless phone call from Isabella. She had, by some miracle of her own dazzling self-promotion, landed the client of her dreams. a notoriously demanding heiress who was planning an outrageously over-the-top Great Gatsby-themed wedding. This wasn't just another event. It was a potential golden ticket, the kind of high-profile spectacle that could catapult Bella Vita events from a parent-funded hobby into a legitimate luxury brand. The problem, as it always was with my sister, was a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality works. Specifically, the reality of cash flow. The deposits for the historic Long Island estate, the Michelin-starred caterer, the 20-piece jazz orchestra, the custom-built champagne tower, they were all due immediately, up front. The heiress, accustomed to the world bending to her will, wouldn't be paying the final, massive invoice until after the last firework had fizzled out. Isabella was caught in a financial vice, and she needed a loan, a significant one. "Evie, I am literally on my knees, begging you," she'd said, her voice a practiced, theatrical whisper I had come to recognize as her crisis mode dialect. It was a sound designed to elicit immediate sympathy and bypass all rational thought. "It's $50,000. That's it. I know it's a lot, but this isn't like the other times. This is my one big shot. If I can just pull this off, I'll be set for life. I swear on everything. I will pay you back the second the client's check clears, with 20% interest. Please, Evie, don't let me fail now." It was a tempting narrative. It was the story of the underdog on the brink of triumph. A story I knew my parents would find irresistible. I sat in my quiet home office, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, and I thought about the $16 million sitting in a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, quietly, effortlessly growing. $50,000 was, in the grand scheme of my new reality, a rounding error. It was nothing. A single stock fluctuated by more than that on a daily basis. But it was also everything. To give her that money would be to sign another lease on the dysfunctional family structure I had spent a decade trying to escape. It would be another injection of life support into a system that was fundamentally broken. Another bailout that would teach her nothing except that the consequences of her poor planning were always someone else's problem to solve. It would be an act not of support, but of sabotage of any chance she might ever have of learning to stand on her own. So I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water, and I said no. "I can't, Isabella," I said, my voice carefully calibrated to be gentle but firm, an iron fist in a velvet glove. "I'm sorry you're in this position, but my finances are all tied up right now. I just don't have that kind of liquid cash available." The lie felt slick and ugly in my mouth, a necessary poison. I hated it, but I knew the truth was a weapon she would immediately turn against me. The silence on the other end of the line was a physical thing, heavy and cold and sharp around the edges. When her voice returned, the whisper was gone, replaced by a venomous hiss that was pure, uncut Isabella. "Tied up? What, in your sensible little 401k and your pathetic index funds? God, Evelyn, you are the most selfish person I have ever known. You have no idea what it's like to have a real dream, to actually take a risk and build something beautiful. You just sit there in your safe little job, in your boring little house, judging the rest of us who are actually trying to live." She didn't wait for a response. The line went dead. 2 days later, as expected, the follow-up assault came from my father. His tone wasn't angry, which would have been easier to handle. It was the tone of a deeply, profoundly disappointed patriarch. "Evelyn," he began, foregoing any pleasantries, "your mother told me about your conversation with your sister. I have to admit, I'm struggling to understand your position. We raised you better than this. Family helps family. That is the code we have always lived by. Your sister is on the verge of the biggest success of her life, and you won't even extend her a hand? What is the point of all your careful saving and planning if you're just going to hoard it like a dragon? Money is a tool, meant to be used, especially for the people you love." The dragon metaphor was so painfully ironic I almost choked. "It's not about the money, Dad. I tried to explain, my voice feeling small against his booming certainty. It's about the pattern. This isn't the first time she's been in a crisis. Pattern? He scoffed, the sound crackling over the phone. The only pattern I see is one of my daughters who is out there in the real world, fighting and hustling and making a name for herself, and another who is too scared to even try. You are lucky you have a stable job you can hide behind, Evelyn. Isabella is a creator. She is an artist. Sometimes artists need patrons. A little support from her financially secure sister isn't too much to ask. They were incapable of getting it. They couldn't see the forest for the trees because they had spent a lifetime cultivating one single, perfect sequoia at the expense of everything else in the grove. In their world, my refusal wasn't a principled stand for her long-term growth. It was a personal failing, a lack of generosity, a lack of faith, a lack of love. They found a way to get her the money. Of course, they always did. My mother called me a week later, her voice thick with tears, to inform me they had taken out a second mortgage on their home, the home I grew up in. She presented this information not as a choice they had made, but as a dire consequence of my actions. The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Their financial precarity, their risk, their sacrifice, was now my fault. The pressure was immense, a calculated campaign of guilt and shame. In the family narrative that was now being written, I was the villain. The cold, unfeeling sister who had forced her aging parents to risk the roof over their heads to save her brilliant, struggling sibling. The cracks in our family's foundation were becoming deep, dark fissures, and the anniversary party, I now realized, was the event that was destined to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down into a pile of dust. In the weeks leading up to the party, our family's communication channels transformed into a war room for psychological warfare. The atmosphere was thick with a toxic, suffocating blend of manufactured excitement and palpable resentment, and I was the designated target. Isabella, having secured the second mortgage funding from my parents, threw herself into the party planning with a manic, almost vengeful energy. It was as if she needed to make the event so spectacularly expensive, so undeniably luxurious, that it would retroactively justify the immense financial risk my parents had taken on her behalf, and, by extension, highlight the stinginess of my refusal. My phone became a battlefield. The family group chat, once a place for bland birthday wishes and holiday photos, was now Isabella's personal stage for her campaign of passive aggression. Every day, a new barrage of photos would appear, towering floral arrangements that cost more than my first car, ridiculously intricate ice sculptures of my parents' faces, a famous string quartet she had somehow booked. Each image was accompanied by a caption meticulously crafted to be a public declaration of gratitude that doubled as a private condemnation of me. So incredibly blessed to have parents who believe in my vision and will do anything to make it a reality. Or, when your family truly supports your dreams, there are no limits to what you can create. Feeling so loved. It was a masterful performance, and my parents were her willing audience in chorus. Their comments would appear moments later, overflowing with praise for her impeccable taste, her unmatched professionalism, and her courageous heart. They were no longer just enabling her. They were co-conspirators. They were doubling down, desperately trying to prove to the world, and perhaps to themselves, that their lifelong investment in her was about to pay off. They needed her to be a success, not just for her sake, but to validate their entire parenting philosophy. The party had ceased to be a celebration of their 40-year marriage. It had become a referendum on Isabella's worth, a high-stakes gamble where their house was the collateral. My role in this unfolding drama was to be the silent, penitent observer, the cautionary tale of a heart gone cold. My mother would call me every few days with updates, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that was far more unnerving than outright anger. "Oh, Evelyn, you should see the linens Isabella chose. Belgian, of course. She has such an incredible eye for detail. It's just such a shame you couldn't be a part of bringing this all together." The unspoken message was a flashing neon sign. This is the joy you refused to contribute to. This is the family harmony you have fractured. Then, a week before the party, the pressure cooker exploded. The Great Gatsby wedding, the event that was supposed to be Isabella's golden ticket, imploded. A major vendor, the one responsible for all the custom-built decor, declared bankruptcy overnight, taking Isabella's substantial six-figure deposit with them. She was in a full-blown, world-ending panic. The $50,000 from my parents' second mortgage was gone, vaporized, and now she was even deeper in the hole, with an enraged heiress threatening lawsuits. The call didn't come from a tearful Isabella this time. It came from both my parents, on speakerphone, a united and formidable front of emotional coercion. "Evelyn," my father started, his voice a low, grave rumble that signaled he was done with niceties. "We have a catastrophic problem. Isabella is on the verge of losing her biggest client, her reputation, everything she has worked for. She is going to be sued into oblivion. She needs another $20,000. Not as a loan, as a gift. It's the only way to plug this hole and stop the bleeding." I stood in my quiet, minimalist kitchen in Austin, staring out at my perfectly manicured, modest backyard, a universe away from the five-alarm fire they were describing. The $16 million sat in its silent digital fortress, a powerful, invisible giant in the room with me. "I told you before," I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I can't." This time, my mother's voice wasn't soft or apologetic. It was as hard and sharp as a shard of glass. "Don't you dare say you can't, Evelyn Vance. Don't you lie to us. We know what a senior software architect at a top tech company makes. We know you have no children, no mortgage, no real expenses. We didn't raise you to be a miser. We didn't raise you to stand by and calmly watch your own flesh and blood drown. She's drowning because you keep throwing her into the middle of the ocean and telling her it's a swimming pool." The words flew out of me before I could stop them. A raw, unfiltered geyser of a truth I had swallowed for 30 years. The silence that followed was absolute, a void. I had broken the cardinal rule. I had not only criticized Isabella, I had criticized their sacred, unimpeachable role as parents. My father's voice, when it finally returned, was like a sheet of ice. "You will be at this party on Saturday. You will put a smile on your face. You will be pleasant to the guests, and you will not, under any circumstances, upset your sister on our special day. We will discuss your profound lack of family loyalty after the fact." The call ended. The battle lines were no longer just drawn. They were fortified with trenches and barbed wire. I was no longer just the unsupportive sister. In their eyes, I was a traitor to the kingdom, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the party was not going to be a celebration. It was going to be a tribunal. They were going to corner me, to use the public setting and the happy occasion to leverage the weight of social pressure and shame me into submission. They were still playing checkers, moving their pieces with predictable, manipulative force. They had no idea I had already bought the company that manufactured the board. The day before I was scheduled to fly out, in a move of such calculated audacity it almost impressed me, Isabella showed up at my front door in Austin. She claimed she was in town for a last-minute emergency vendor meeting, and thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for us to clear the air and reconnect before the big party. It was a lie so transparent I could see the gears of her true motive turning right behind her eyes. But I played along, my internal alarm screaming a deafening klaxon call. My house, which I had deliberately curated to be comfortable, tasteful, and aggressively non-ostentatious, seemed to both confuse and disappoint her. I watched her eyes, sharp and judgmental, scan the simple but solid furniture from crate and barrel, the lack of any significant original art on the walls, the sensible Toyota Camry visible in the driveway. This, in her mind, was irrefutable confirmation of her long-held narrative. I was just sensible, Evie, the boring programmer, living a life as beige and unremarkable as my living room walls. Her plan, I could sense with chilling clarity, was to use my sad little life as emotional leverage in one final, desperate appeal for money. We sat on my comfortable beige sofa and made excruciatingly awkward small talk for what felt like an eternity. She lamented the stress of the party, the impossible demands of her clients, the rising cost of fresh peonies. I listened, offered non-committal murmurs of sympathy. Oh, that sounds tough. Wow. That's a lot to handle, and felt like a complete and utter fraud in my own home. My entire body was humming with a high-frequency anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then came the moment that would pivot the entire course of our lives. Ugh, I really need to use the restroom, she announced with a dramatic sigh, and my phone is completely about to die. Would you be an absolute lifesaver and let me plug it in your office for a few minutes? I just need to get enough juice to call the airline. My home office was my fortress of solitude. It was the room where AV Solutions was born, where Nexus was coded into existence. It was where I still took my high-level consulting calls for Omnicorp. It was also, more importantly, where the physical paper trail of my secret life was kept. A cold, heavy dread washed over me, but I knew that saying no would seem immediately paranoid and deeply strange. It would be an admission of having something to hide. Of course, I said, my voice a marvel of forced casualness. The outlet is right there by the desk. Help yourself. I watched her walk down the short hallway, her designer stilettos clicking an ominous rhythm on the hardwood floors. I went to the kitchen to get her a glass of water, my mind racing, every instinct I possessed screaming that I had just made a catastrophic mistake. Was I being overly suspicious? Maybe she was genuinely just charging her phone. But a lifetime of being Isabella's sister had taught me that she never did anything without a motive, and her motives were rarely pure. I was in the kitchen for no more than 3 minutes, my hands shaking slightly as I filled the glass from the tap. When I walked back into the living room, she was just emerging from the office, a strange, unreadable, and deeply unsettling expression on her face. It was a look of profound shock, quickly masked by a triumphant, predatory glint. "All set," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud. "Thanks so much. You're a lifesaver." She left just a few minutes later, giving me an uncharacteristically warm, lingering hug at the door that felt like a snake coiling around me. "See you tomorrow, sis. I'm so glad we did this. It's going to be a great day." The moment her rental car pulled away from the curb, I sprinted down the hall to my office. Everything on the surface looked exactly as I had left it. Her phone was gone. My laptop was closed. The stack of papers on my desk seemed undisturbed, but the very air in the room felt different, violated. My desk has a single high-quality lock on the bottom right drawer. It's where I keep the hard copies of my most sensitive documents, the original signed acquisition agreement with Omnicorp, my corporate bank statements, my personal tax filings. I kept the small silver key in a place I thought was clever. A small, discreet ceramic bowl on the corner of my desk, buried beneath a mountain of mundane paperclips. It was hiding in plain sight. My heart pounded a frantic, painful rhythm as I walked to the desk. I plunged my fingers into the bowl of paperclips. The key was still there. A wave of relief, so intense it made me dizzy, washed over me. I had been paranoid. It was all in my head. I took out the key and unlocked the drawer, just to be sure, just to soothe the last vestiges of my anxiety. The files were all there, a neat stack of manila folders, just as I'd left them. I was about to close the drawer, to laugh at my own foolishness, when my eye caught it. A single, almost imperceptible detail. One pristine manila folder was slightly misaligned with the others, sticking out a bare millimeter from the rest of the perfectly flush stack. I never left my files that way. I am pathologically meticulous. My blood ran cold. I pulled out the folder with a trembling hand. The label on it read, Vance, E., Personal Wealth Management, Q2 Summary. Inside was a consolidated financial statement from my personal wealth advisor at Goldman Sachs, a comprehensive quarterly summary I had reviewed just last week. My eyes scanned the columns of assets, equities, bonds, real estate holdings, and then I saw the line at the very bottom of the first page, the one I had stared at for an hour the day the money had first arrived. It was in bold, black, undeniable ink. Total net worth, est, 16,247,301.58. She had found it. She had either picked the simple lock on my desk, a dubious skill I vaguely remembered her bragging about learning from a delinquent ex-boyfriend in college, or, more likely, she had watched me unlock it once before and noted the key's hiding place. She had found the most damning document she could, absorbed its contents, and then carefully put it back, locking the drawer to cover her tracks. She hadn't confronted me. She hadn't screamed or demanded an explanation. She had taken the information and walked out my front door, armed with a secret she now intended to deploy as a weapon of mass destruction. The hug at the door, the bright smile, the promise of seeing me tomorrow, it was all a chilling, sociopathic performance. She wasn't coming to the party for a truce. She was coming for total war, and she had just acquired her atomic bomb. I sank into my office chair, the document shaking in my hand. The quiet, carefully constructed life I had built for myself had been breached. The firewall was down, and I knew, with the kind of certainty that felt like a death sentence, that the next time I saw my sister, it would be on a battlefield of her own choosing, in front of everyone we had ever known. The only question left was when, and how, she would choose to strike the match. Of course. Here is the final block of the story, with parts 7, 8, 9, and 10 expanded to meet your requirements for a rich, detailed, and emotionally powerful narrative conclusion. The flight to Connecticut the next morning was a journey through a strange, suspended reality. I felt like an actor in a play who had just been handed a completely new script moments before the curtain was set to rise. The external world was the same, the drone of the jet engines, the polite inquiries of the flight attendant, the familiar descent over the lush, green landscape of New England. But my internal world had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered. I was no longer flying home to a party. I was flying into an ambush. I now knew that behind every polite smile my sister would offer, behind every seemingly innocent inquiry from my parents, there would be a ticking clock, counting down to a detonation of her choosing. When the car service I'd hired dropped me at the end of their long, winding driveway, the scene was already one of almost aggressive perfection. The backyard had been transformed into a fantasy land from a Ralph Lauren catalog. Enormous white tents, their peaks billowing like sails in the gentle breeze, had been erected on the main lawn. A string quartet, all dressed in crisp black, was playing Vivaldi softly near my mother's prize-winning rose garden. Waiters in starched white jackets circulated with silver trays laden with champagne flutes and impossibly delicate hors d'oeuvre. It was a flawless illusion of family happiness, generational wealth, and effortless success. I had to walk into the middle of it all, a Trojan horse filled not with soldiers, but with a terrible, explosive truth. Isabella greeted me at the entrance to the main tent, a receiving line of one. She was the very picture of the gracious, triumphant hostess, wearing a dazzling smile that was a masterpiece of social engineering. It was wide and bright, but it didn't come anywhere near her eyes. Her eyes, when they finally met mine over the heads of two arriving guests, held a new and terrifying glint. It was a sharp, predatory light I had never seen there before, the gleam of a hunter that has its prey cornered and is in no hurry to make the kill. "Evie, you made it," she chirped, her voice a pitch too high as she leaned in to kiss the air next to my cheek, her expensive perfume enveloping me in a cloying cloud. "I'm so glad you're here. Isn't it all just fabulous? I nearly died from the stress, but I think it was worth it. It's beautiful, Isabella. You did an amazing job," I said, my own voice a marvel of control. I betrayed none of the roiling chaos inside me. We were two generals meeting on the battlefield, exchanging pleasantries before the slaughter began. It was a strange, silent, and deeply perverse power struggle. She knew that I had to know she had been in my private files. I knew that she was planning to use that information to publicly destroy me, but neither of us could acknowledge it. We were trapped in the polite, suffocating fiction of our family, forced to play our designated roles until the curtain finally fell. For the next 2 hours, I moved through the party like a ghost in a dream. I made excruciatingly polite small talk with my parents' friends, people who had known me since I was a child, all of whom seemed contractually obligated to tell me how proud my parents must be of both their wonderful daughters, Isabella, the artist, and Evelyn, the scientist. One of my father's golf partners boomed, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. "You two cover all the bases. Richard and Helen must be bursting with pride." I just smiled and nodded, a perfect automaton of social grace, feeling the crushing weight of my secret life pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I watched Isabella. Her performance was nothing short of masterful. She flitted from group to group, a social butterfly with steel wings, her laughter a little louder, her gestures a little grander, her stories a little more embellished than usual. She was building her audience, charming the crowd, meticulously setting the stage for her grand final act. Every few minutes, she would shoot me a glance across the perfectly manicured lawn, a small, triumphant smirk, a subtle wink, a gesture of shared conspiracy that was meant only for me. It was a cat-and-mouse game, and she was enjoying every single, sadistic second of it. My parents remained blissfully, willfully oblivious. They were basking in the reflected glory of the event, accepting endless compliments on their beautiful home and their even more beautiful daughters. They interpreted Isabella's manic, high-wattage energy as the glow of success. They saw my quiet, watchful stillness as, well, just me being me, Evie, the stoic observer. At one point, my mother, her face flushed with champagne and pride, pulled me aside near the bar. "Honey," she whispered, her voice conspiratorial as she squeezed my arm with surprising force. "I know things have been tense between you and your sister lately, and I know you think she's been difficult. But please, just for today, can you try to be happy for her? Just look at what she's accomplished. She just needs to know that you're in her corner." I looked at my mother's pleading, hopeful face, a face I had spent my entire life trying to please, and I felt a sadness so profound it was like a physical weight in my chest. She wasn't just blind. She had actively, over the course of 30 years, chosen not to see. She had painstakingly built a reality that was comfortable for her, a simple diorama where Isabella was the fragile, brilliant dreamer and I was the stoic, unbreakable support beam. The idea that the entire foundation of the house was the other way around was a truth her mind simply could not, and would not, accommodate. The sun began its slow, dramatic descent, casting a golden, almost cinematic glow over the whole scene. The caterers began lighting the hundreds of candles that adorned all the tables, and the string quartet transitioned from the cheerful Vivaldi to a more mellow evening melody by Debussy. The atmosphere was perfectly, painfully beautiful. It was time for the speeches. My father, beaming with a pride that was almost painful to watch, stepped up to the small, raised platform that had been set up for the occasion, tapping a crystal glass against the microphone. "Friends, family," he began, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "Helen and we want to thank you all for being here to celebrate 40 truly wonderful years. But we all know the real star of this evening, the one who created this magical wonderland for us all, is my daughter, Isabella." The crowd applauded warmly, and Isabella, standing near the stage, took a small, theatrical bow, a queen accepting the adoration of her subjects. The trap was being set. The bait was on the hook. I could feel the tightening in my stomach, the cold dread coiling in my gut. I took a slow, steadying breath, my hand tightening around the simple, elegant clutch at my side. I had no idea what form the attack would take, But for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't afraid of a confrontation with my family. The shadow had lived in the dark for far too long. It was ready for the light. My father continued his speech, his voice swelling with a nostalgic pride that was both touching and, to me, deeply ironic. He recounted a series of well-worn anecdotes about his 40 years with my mother, the story of their disastrous first date, the time they got snowed in during a blizzard, the birth of their 2 daughters. It was sweet. It was sentimental. And it was the perfectly polished opening act for the horror show to come. He finished by raising his champagne flute high. To my beautiful wife, Helen, the love of my life, and to our family, which will always be the greatest accomplishment of our lives. The guests dutifully raised their glasses, murmured their hears, and drank. Then, just as everyone expected him to step down, he did something unexpected. He cleared his throat, and his expression shifted, the celebratory warmth draining away to be replaced by a look of grave, paternal seriousness. His eyes scanned the crowd, deliberately passing over me before coming back to land on me with the focused intensity of a spotlight. "I also want to take this moment," he said, his voice dropping to a more somber, authoritative register, "to talk about what family really means." My blood ran cold. The ambient temperature in the tent seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was it. "It means being there for each other," he continued, his gaze still locked on me, in the good times and, more importantly, in the bad. "It means supporting each other's dreams, even when you don't understand them. It means lifting each other up when we fall." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the now silent crowd. "My daughter Isabella," he went on, gesturing toward her with a sweep of his arm, "has dreams as big and beautiful as this sky. She has the talent, she has the vision, but like all great artists, she sometimes faces struggles, and it is the sacred job of her family to be her safety net." He looked directly at me now, his expression a carefully crafted mixture of paternal command and public, heartfelt appeal. He was speaking to me, but he was performing for the audience. "Evelyn, your sister needs you. We need you. We all need to know that you will be a part of that safety net, that you will always, always put family first." The entire party, 100 people, went utterly, completely silent. Every single eye in that tent turned to me. It was a public shaming of the highest order, orchestrated with a chilling, theatrical precision. I was being painted as the cold, uncharitable, selfish sister in front of 100 witnesses who were also friends, neighbors, and business associates. I was supposed to be cornered, humiliated, broken down. I was supposed to weep and beg for forgiveness and promise to give Isabella whatever she wanted, just to make the excruciating public pressure stop. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, I still don't know what, but before a single sound could escape my lips, Isabella's voice, sharp and clear and dripping with contemptuous laughter, cut through the silence. "Oh, a safety net," she laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor or warmth. She moved with the speed of a predator, stepping forward and snatching the microphone from my father's stunned, outstretched hand. "Dad, you are so sweet. And so clueless. You have no idea what you're even asking for." She turned to face the captivated crowd, a wild, feverish, and triumphant look in her eyes. "You all look at my sister, at Sensible Evie in her boring little navy dress and her boring little software job, and you think she's the one who needs to contribute to the safety net? You think I'm the one here asking her for a handout?" She spun around with a dramatic flourish and pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at me. "This woman," she declared, her voice rising with every word, "my sister, isn't just a programmer. She is a liar of epic proportions." For years, while she was telling me she was strapped for cash, while she was watching our parents, our wonderful, generous parents, risk their own home to help me build my dream, she was sitting on a secret fortune. The collective gasp from the guests was a physical force, a wave of shock that washed over the tent. My parents looked utterly, completely bewildered, their heads turning back and forth between me and Isabella, as if they were watching a tennis match they didn't understand. "What are you talking about, Isabella?" my mother whispered, her face as pale as the tablecloths. "I'm talking about $16 million! Isabella screamed, the number ripping through the quiet evening air like a gunshot. "I saw it! I saw her bank statements! She sold some stupid, nerdy computer thing to Omnicorp, and she's a multi-millionaire. She has been for 3 years. And she said nothing. She let us struggle. She let us worry. She let us risk everything, all while she was secretly one of the richest people in this whole damn yard." The meltdown was absolute. It was a full-blown, no-holds-barred public exorcism of every ounce of jealousy, resentment, and profound insecurity she had harbored against me for her entire life. Her beautiful face was contorted into an ugly mask of rage, her perfect makeup now smudged by the angry, black tears that streamed down her cheeks. "You want her to be my safety net?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysterical, unhinged fury. "She could have paid for this entire party with the interest she probably earned yesterday. She could have funded my business 100 times over without even noticing. But she chose not to. She chose to stand by and watch me struggle, to watch me fail, because she's always been jealous of me. She's always wanted my life, my friends, my spirit." The spectacular irony of that last statement, the sheer, breathtaking delusion of it, was so staggering that a small, incredulous laugh almost escaped my lips. The crowd was frozen, a tableau of shocked faces illuminated by the soft, flickering glow of the party lights. My father stood on the stage like a statue, the microphone cord dangling uselessly from his hand. My mother looked as though she was about to faint. And me? I just stood there, in the absolute eye of the hurricane my sister had created, and I felt a strange, profound, and utterly unexpected calm settle over me. The bomb had finally gone off. The secret was out. And as I looked at my sister's unraveling, pathetic form and the smoldering wreckage of my parents' perfect party, I realized something with the clarity of a lightning strike. This wasn't just the end of a lie. It was the beginning of my truth. In the deafening, ringing silence that followed Isabella's final, screeching accusation, the only sound was the Vivaldi score, left open on the music stands of the string quartet, being rustled by the evening breeze. The party was over. The spell was broken. Guests, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a delicious, horrified fascination, began to murmur amongst themselves. They avoided eye contact with any of us, the Vance family, as if our dysfunction were a contagious disease. They made quiet, hasty exits, melting away into the darkness like ghosts. Within 15 minutes, the perfectly manicured lawn, which moments before had been a stage for our family's greatest performance, was empty. It was littered with the evidence of a celebration that had become a wake. Half-eaten canapes, abandoned champagne flutes, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume and betrayal. All that remained was the 4 of us, standing amidst the wreckage. The illusion had been not just shattered, but vaporized, and what was left was raw, ugly, and inescapable. My father was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper that was a pathetic echo of his usual commanding tone. "Evelyn, is it true?" He couldn't bring himself to look at me. He was staring at Isabella, his eyes pleading with her, as if hoping she'd suddenly announce it was all an elaborate, cruel, and very unfunny joke. I waited until he finally, reluctantly, dragged his gaze to meet mine. "Yes," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as solid and unyielding as granite. It carried the weight of a decade of silence, of 1,000 swallowed words. "It's true." My mother made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat, like a small animal in pain, and sank into a nearby white garden chair, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest. Isabella, her rage momentarily spent and replaced by a heaving, self-pitying exhaustion, was now sobbing. But her sobs weren't sad. They were angry, accusatory. "See?" she choked out, pointing a shaky finger at me. "See what she did to us? She lied to us. For years." "I never lied to you, Isabella," I said, my voice still unnervingly calm as I took a single, deliberate step toward them. "I just stopped sharing the parts of my life that you had all made it abundantly, painfully clear you weren't interested in." "Not interested?" My father finally roared, his shock finally igniting into a towering, righteous anger. "You made $16 million, and you didn't think to tell your own family? Your own mother and father? What kind of cold, heartless person does that? The kind of person who has spent her entire life having every single one of her achievements minimized or ignored." I shot back, the calm finally cracking, allowing the years of stored-up, pressurized hurt to finally surface. "The kind of person whose full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country was met with a distracted pat on the head. The kind of person who knew with the certainty of a religious prophecy, that if I had told you about that money, in that very instant, it would have ceased to be mine. It would have become the family fund. It would have become an endless, bottomless well for Isabella's next dozen failed business ventures. It would have become your early retirement plan, your ticket to a more lavish life, your new talking point at the country club. It would have become anything and everything but what it actually was. Mine. Something I built by myself in the dark while you were all busy celebrating the Sunday." I turned my full attention to Isabella, who had stopped crying and was now glaring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "And you?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "You want to talk about lies? You showed up at my house under false pretenses, you broke into my private office, you went through my personal legal documents, and you stole my information. You came to this party tonight, not to celebrate Mom and Dad's 40 years of marriage, but to stage a public ambush, to humiliate me into giving you money. You have the audacity to speak to me of jealousy? The concept is so foreign to you, you wouldn't recognize it. You have spent your entire life being handed everything on a silver platter, and you have the nerve to resent me for building my own? You don't resent my success, Isabella. You resent the fact that it's not yours to spend." "It should be!" she screamed, her voice raw and cracking. "We're family! That's what family does! Half of that should be mine by right. I'm the one who needs it. You don't even do anything with it. You live like a librarian in your sad beige house. The fact that you see my life as lesser because I don't need to spend money on frivolous, material things to feel a sense of self-worth is the entire problem," I said, my voice dropping again, suddenly tired of the yelling, tired of all of it. "I have that money precisely because I am not you. I don't need $1,000 dress to feel worthy. I don't need a lavish party to prove my value to the world. What I have is security. I have peace of mind. I have freedom. The very things you have been desperately, frantically chasing your whole life with Mom and Dad's checkbook." I finally looked at my parents. My mother was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. My father looked utterly deflated, as if his very skeleton had dissolved. He looked like an old man. "You did this," I said to them, my voice softening, not with forgiveness, but with a deep, aching sadness. "You created this monster. You spent 30 years teaching her that her wants were needs, and that my needs didn't even exist. You praised her for her spirit, while you punished me for my strength. You are just as much to blame for this disgusting, humiliating disaster as she Island." My father just shook his head, looking lost and bewildered. We loved you both," he stammered. "We thought, Evelyn, you were always so capable." "You didn't think I was capable," I corrected him, my voice now gentle. "The voice you use to explain a hard truth to a child. You thought I was convenient, and there is a world of difference between the two." For a long, long time nobody spoke. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the evening wind, and the distant, indifferent hum of traffic on the highway. The truth, in all its brutal, liberating, and catastrophic glory, had finally been laid bare. There were no more roles left to play. The golden child, the invisible daughter, the proud parents, they had all died on this lawn tonight. We were just four broken, shattered people standing in the ruins of a life that had been built on a foundation of secrets, resentments, and lies. And for the very first time, we had to figure out who we were without the fiction. The 7 months that followed the apocalyptic anniversary party were the most difficult, painful, and ultimately, the most transformative of my entire life. The family didn't just crack, it shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. For the first 2 weeks, there was a complete and total silence between us. A digital and telephonic void. It was as if we had all retreated to our respective corners of the country to nurse our wounds, survey the unimaginable damage, and try to process the new, terrifying reality. Then, the attempts to re-engage began, not with an apology or an olive branch, but with a new, desperate strategy of attack. My father, falling back on the only language he truly understands, the language of corporate power, sent me a series of rigid, formal emails. They were written as if to a hostile business adversary, demanding a full financial disclosure and a formal family meeting with his team of lawyers present to discuss my moral and familial obligations. I replied to his third email with a single, unequivocal sentence: I will not be discussing my personal, private finances with your attorneys under any circumstances. He was trying to regain control, to pull me back onto a playing field where he made the rules and could intimidate me into submission. It was a pathetic, transparent, and utterly failed attempt. My mother, true to form, tried a different tactic, a full-scale emotional siege of guilt. She left long, rambling, and often incoherent voicemails filled with dramatic sighs and choked-back tears. She talked about how the stress was affecting her health, how her heart was fluttering, how Isabella wasn't eating or sleeping, how the family was falling apart at the seams, and how only I, her strong, capable daughter, had the power to fix it all by being the bigger person. I knew exactly what being the bigger person meant. It was code for, give Isabella a few $1,000,000 so we can all go back to pretending this nightmare never happened. I deleted every voicemail without listening to the end. I refused to be a prisoner of her emotional manipulation any longer. Isabella, faced for the first time in her pampered life with the unyielding reality that the magic money tree was not going to bear fruit for her, had a complete and total breakdown. The Great Gatsby wedding fell through in a spectacular, fiery fashion, leading to a nasty lawsuit from the enraged heiress. Bella Vita Events, her great life's work, went bankrupt in less than a month. She had to face real, adult consequences, with no parental bailout in sight, because they had already leveraged everything they had to fund her last failure. The fallout was swift and brutal. She had to sell her chic, downtown condo at a loss, move into a small, rundown rental apartment in a less desirable part of town, and get a job, a real, humbling, 9-to-5 job as a receptionist at a dental office. It was during this forced march through reality that something, slowly and painfully, began to shift. The first crack of light came, surprisingly, from my mother. After weeks of my impenetrable silence, she called one day and, for the very first time, she didn't cry or blame or sigh. She just asked, her voice small and tentative, can you tell me about it? Your work, the Nexus thing, how you actually did it. I want to understand. So, I told her. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, patiently explaining the complex beauty of the algorithm, the brutal, sleepless nights, the terror of the initial launch, the stress and exhilaration of building a company from absolutely nothing. I told her about my fears and my triumphs, stories I had never shared with another living soul except Marcus, and she just listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make it about Isabella. She just listened. At the end of it, she was quiet for a long, long moment, and then she said, her voice thick with a sorrow that was finally genuine, We were fools, Evelyn. We were such arrogant fools. We were so proud of a flickering, beautiful candle, we never even bothered to notice the sun was rising right behind us. I am so, so sorry. It was the first real, unconditional apology I had received from her in my entire life, and it cracked open a door inside me I thought had been welded shut and buried forever. My father was a much harder case. It took him seeing Isabella truly struggle, seeing her humbled by the daily indignity of a budget and an alarm clock, for him to begin to grasp the profound generational damage his enabling had done. Our first real conversation happened over a tense coffee 3 months after the party. He didn't apologize, not in words. My father is not a man who apologizes, but he did ask questions. He asked about my company, about the market, about my plans for the future. He was speaking to me not as his disappointing, incomprehensible daughter, but as a peer, as a fellow business owner. For him, that was a seismic, revolutionary shift. And Isabella? Our relationship is still a fragile, tentative, and deeply complicated thing. The first time she reached out, it was with a short, bitter text. I hope you're happy now. But a month later, another text came, late one night. My boss is a complete nightmare. How did you do it? Like, actually run a whole company with employees and everything? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a truce. But it was the beginning of a dialogue, one based for the first time on a tiny, grudging sliver of respect. There was no easy fairy tale ending to this story. I did not write her a check. I did not solve her problems. I did, however, anonymously pay for her to see a top-tier financial advisor and a therapist who specializes in family dynamics. I also set up a blind trust for my parents to ensure they could live out their retirement without the fear of losing their home, but with strict, ironclad stipulations that the money could not be gifted or loaned to Isabella. I established firm, clear, and non-negotiable boundaries. My love for them, I realized, was no longer unconditional. It was now predicated on a foundation of respect, a respect they are all, slowly, painstakingly, learning how to give. Last week, I visited them in Connecticut. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant. We had a simple dinner in the kitchen of my childhood home. Isabella talked about her boring job with a surprising and refreshing lack of self-pity. My dad asked me for my opinion on a new tech merger he'd read about. My mom smiled a real, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. We are not the perfect, happy family from the anniversary party photos. We never were. We are a messy, flawed, and fractured group of people, learning how to build something new and more honest from the rubble. My money didn't fix my family. My honesty did. And the greatest lesson I have learned in this long, painful journey is that my net worth has absolutely nothing to do with my self-worth. My value was never determined by their approval, and those $16 million didn't give me power. They just gave me the freedom to finally stop asking for their permission to be myself. If you have ever had to fight to be seen by your own family, or if you have struggled with the immense difficulty of setting boundaries with the people you love the most, I want you to know that you are not alone. Please, share your story in the comments below. What did you learn from your own experience? If this story touched you, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more real-life stories just like this one, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their value is not, and never has been, up for debate. Thank you for listening.